she will be sharing with us later on in the service. So that'll be a little bit later on. Hopefully you get a chance to meet Deb and chat with her. We had a great time last night at Praise Fellowship. I keep forgetting the name of that church. Praise Fellowship Church. They had a huge fundraiser. About a couple hundred people. They raised thousands and thousands of dollars. It was a really fun time. They had a live auctioneer, and you're bidding on desserts, and people were spending hundreds of dollars on desserts, and it was really fun, and it all went to bless this ministry. So I'm excited to hear more about it, and for all of us to hear more about it, and hopefully partner more with the Potter's Hands Foundation. I just want to give you a quick note of warning a little bit. What Deb will be speaking on is going to be some pretty heavy stuff. What the foundation deals with is some pretty harsh realities in our world. So we really encourage the kids to go to children's ministry time. And if you have a child in 5th or 6th grade who wants to go down too, if you're uncomfortable with some of the subject matter that we'll be talking about regarding human trafficking and drug use and to some of the realities that their ministry deals with. If you're not comfortable with that, your kids are welcome to go to children's ministry time a little bit later on. So just a heads up about that. But in your bulletins, there are several important announcements coming up. We began last month. We started doing fellowship dinners once a month, the last Thursday of every month. And the one in October is coming up in a couple weeks. On October 26th, we will be having another fellowship dinner at 5:30 here at the church. And actually, I have clipboards to pass around because we need to know how many people are planning to attend this. So I'm going to pass these around. One per each row here. I should have asked somebody else to pass. Sorry about that. So if you are planning to attend, all the information is right there on the screen. It's $5 a person. If you are planning to attend, please write your name and how many people from your family will be there. We need to know so we know how much food to prepare. We're going to have activities for kids as well after the dinner so that the adults can have time to hang out and fellowship and play some games without the little ones running all over the place. They'll have their own place to go. So it should be a good time to connect with some other folks. So that is the 26th on a Thursday in a couple weeks. On the 28th, we are having restarting our men's breakfast. So that is on Saturday the 28th at 8 a.m. So if you are a guy, high school age and up, you are welcome and encouraged to join us for breakfast. It is for any man in the church. It's a great breakfast. Jim makes this casserole that will change your life. And I'm preaching sort of right now today. It is a really, really, really good casserole. And we have lots of food. So we are also going to be talking about the direction of the men's ministry, kind of where we want to take it, what we want to do with it, going beyond just getting together for breakfast, but how we are going to disciple one another. So if you have ideas about that or input about that, we'd really love to have your ideas. So please make that a priority. That's Saturday the 28th. Another thing coming up that's important in the life of our church is on November 4th. That is also a Saturday. That is our annual church conference where we will be voting on important things like some staff budget items and trustees and things like that, kind of the business of the church. Any member of Trinity is welcome to attend and have a vote at annual conference. And again, that is Saturday, November 4th at, I think it's 10 a.m. at Bemis Point Church. Lots of other churches will be having their meetings there too. So that is Bemis Point UMC. My last announcement involves you moving a little bit. So I need you to turn around completely around. And look at that blank wall back there, where Nikki Kane is standing. Everybody's looking at her now. Thank you, Vanna White, a.k.a. Nikki Kane. That blank wall will soon become a window. We have voted as a church council to kind of help in order to beautify our sanctuary and to kind of expand where people can sit and serve a lot of functions. We're going to be putting in a window there. By we, I mean the trustees. By trustees, I probably mean Mike Moreno. In the next few weeks, we will be putting in a window there. If you have questions or concerns about why we're doing that or the cost or whatever, talk to me about that. Talk with any of our trustees about that. This is a discussion that we've been having over several months about kind of how to improve our sanctuary in a variety of ways. And so if you have any questions about that, I wanted to give you a heads up before they started the spread throughout the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues, and everyone praised him. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone on the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
A lot of times this isn't a sermon, I promise. When we worship, we have to have the right mentality, the right mindset of understanding that, again, none of us came here this morning for us. Like, none of us came here to just stamp our passbook and we did a church thing and we're getting out of here. We came because of passages like that, in which Jesus stood up and said, "This is why I'm here. I'm not here so that you guys think I'm amazing as Jesus. I'm here to set captives free. I'm here to redeem the lost." And when we sing songs like Hosanna, "You are the God who saves us," I pray that it's a reality. I pray that it's not just this is a pretty song. I pray that it's no, Hosanna, the one who saved. I pray that that's a reality that sets in our hearts. We have a new song we're going to do this morning. And I know that you guys believe that Jesus is this incredible person. If you've ever been a Christian for 5 minutes, that's what you believe. If you're new, you're going to realize that. When we sing a song that says, "What a beautiful name it is," my prayer is that that name just plays in our heads. That we stop and think about who Jesus is and what he did for us. So will you guys join us in singing this song?
Thank you.
but repetitive so that my heart and my mind will understand. This is what I'm called to. I'm called to praise you and thank you and declare what a beautiful name is the name of Jesus. God, we ask you to be honored both in what's said and what's received and how it changes the way that we live this morning. It's in Jesus' name we all pray. Amen. Be seated.
My Sunday school class read through this book called Counterculture by David Platt, and this book covers a lot of different heavy topics of controversial issues going on in our world. Some debated, some just calling out evil and injustice. There's a chapter in this book that was about human trafficking, sex trafficking, and collectively, as a Sunday school class, our hearts just broke as we heard stories of girls and families manipulated and stolen and deceived into this evil practice. And so one of my goals for this class was to not just read a book about all of these things, but what are we going to do about it? How are we not just going to say, oh, that's interesting, but actually be the church, be active in ending injustice, in being Christ as he laid out in Luke chapter 4, being his body. And so as we were reading this chapter, as we concluded our discussions, a friend of mine, Larry, who's the associate pastor of Gary Free Methodist, we've been friends for a long time, he called me and talked to me about this foundation called Potter's Hands Foundation. As we were ending this chapter, asking if we as a church might want to get involved. First, if I wanted to learn about it, learn more about Deb and all the great work that God was able to do through her and her volunteers and how God is working in this ministry. And it was too perfect to ignore. As we were ending this chapter, as our hearts were breaking about this issue, here's an opportunity. And so that was last year. And as I said last night, several of us were able to attend a fundraiser for the Potter's Hands Foundation. We were able to learn a little bit more about it. And Deb was speaking at this event, and Larry said, would you like to have Deb speak at your church? And before he finished the sentence, I said yes, because she's incredible. She has an incredible story. Not about her. She's an incredible person, but her testimony is about what God has been able to do and the doors that he has been able to open for this ministry to happen. So I'm really, really thankful that she's with us today. So I'd like to invite up Deb Keener, and will you welcome her as she comes forward?
I thought I turned myself off for a minute there. Good morning. How many of you were able to be at the event last night? So for those of you who were there, I just want you to know I think we raised about $18,000 on desserts and a few other items, which is amazing, really amazing. When God shows up, he shows up in a big way, right? So for me, this all started, I guess, when my daughter-in-law came back from India. She had been on a missions trip over there, and she had worked with women who were sex trafficked in a restorative care environment. She came back to the U.S., and she and I started talking about her experiences. At that time, I was an 8th grade English teacher, teaching middle schoolers where to put commas and how to write sentences and all of those things. But I've always had a passion for the broken and the hurting in our world. And so when she and I started talking about what she'd experienced, I discovered that God was calling me to do something about it. Initially, I thought I would be raising money to send to countries like India, Thailand, Cambodia, where this was a problem that we kind of had heard about and the world was starting to pay attention to. Only every time I started looking at the issue myself and going on the internet and researching, I kept seeing the term domestic sex trafficking and domestic minor sex trafficking, which meant it's happening here in the United States. That just about broke me. It's like, okay, I don't get this. How can this be happening in our country, in our world? Obviously, I know that sin is in our world, but in a country like ours, how can it be happening? And so one of the things
And I told her I was going to meet with this woman, and she's like, how do you know she's not a murderer? How do you know? I'm like, Mom, it's okay. Tom's going with me. We're meeting at like Outback or something. But anyway, I was so enlightened by that conversation because she traveled all over the world educating people in these villages in different countries around the world how to protect their kids, while she was also fighting the battle right here in Buffalo and Hamburg, New York, just educating and rescuing girls. She was a deputy sheriff about this high, and I was just so impressed by her. So anyway, I told her that day, I said, I feel like I'm supposed to open up a home for these women, but I don't know the first thing about this, but I just feel so compelled to do it. Have you guys ever heard Matthew West's song, Do Something? Any of you? One day driving down the road and listening to that song, if you don't know the song, it talks about how this guy in the song is kind of saying, you know, there's so much brokenness in our world. We have kids who are being sold for sex. We have just hurricanes and tornadoes and all of this is so destructive. And, you know, somebody needs to do something about this. And he kind of shakes his fist at God in heaven and says, why don't you do something? And God says, I did. I created you. And when I heard that song, it just about broke my heart because I'm like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to do something about this. Like, if I don't do it, who's going to? That's kind of what was going through my head. And so I just prayed to God and said, every single day, Lord, show me what to do today. Show me what to do today. Show me what to do today. And he has brought us over the course of 4 years to an incredibly, I can't even describe what he's done, but I'll kind of share the story as we go through the video or the slide presentation. You can go ahead and click to the next slide. How many of you guys feel like you know something about human trafficking? Okay, a little. So in the United States, we have a law, and you can go to the next slide, that talks about, by the way, we are a faith-based organization. I need to throw that out there first, that we are guided by the gospel of Jesus Christ, and everything we do goes through that lens with him at the center of what we're doing. But in the United States, in order for it to be considered sex trafficking, it has to include force, fraud, or coercion. Those are the 3 words that it has to have, unless the individual is under the age of 18, okay? So for example, we know that kids have been sexually abused from the beginning of time. We just know that. Unfortunately, that's a reality in our world. When you look at the definition of sex trafficking for minors, if an individual under the age of 18 is offered anything in exchange for a sexual act, it would be considered sex trafficking. If the guy next door lures a young person into a sexual act and puts gas in her car, that's sex trafficking. Gives her cigarettes, that's sex trafficking. Gives her drugs, that's sex trafficking. Doesn't have to be cash, it just has to be something in exchange, or nothing. It could be providing them a place to sleep, it could be food, it could be any of those things. If the individual's over the age of 18, it's a different story, because then they have to go to a court of law and have that proven. This drives me a little bit crazy because when you think about it, today I'm 17 years old and 364 days, and I've been trafficked since I was 12 years old, and then I have a birthday. Now all of a sudden, it has to go to the court system, and it gets tied up there, and it's a whole different story where she can actually be charged as a criminal for what's been happening to her for the last 6 years. Go ahead to the next slide, please. I kind of go all over the place. It's nice to have them back here. So it's a little hard to read the red on the back screen, though. The average age a child is trafficked is 12. That's kind of the beginning phase, because 12-year-olds, let's face it, they're vulnerable. 12-year-olds who feel unloved are even more vulnerable because they feel like nobody cares about me. All of a sudden, this individual shows up and starts paying attention, and they get lured in before they know it. Factors that can lead to this lifestyle for an individual: obviously unstable home life, physical and sexual abuse, chronic runaway homelessness, exposure to drugs, online communication with someone that you don't know. How many of you have ever done that? Talk to somebody online that you don't know? When I talk, all right, I saw 2 hands in this room, okay? When I speak with your kids, guess how many hands are up? Almost all of them. You just need to know that. And I speak in schools and I speak at conferences with youth all the time, so you just need to be aware that they are talking to people that they don't know. In fact, at the last conference that Brianne and I were at, there was a law enforcement official who was there, and he was sharing a story about I think it's, I don't know gaming systems, guys, so forgive me if I mess up, but I think it was Xbox 360, where you can actually communicate with people. And this dad was in the other room and heard an adult male in his living room and walked in, and the guy had nothing on the screen in front of his two small boys. And it's horrifying what can come into your home through a gaming system that you think, you know, my kids are just playing a game. They're fine. So you need to know what they're doing. You need to know how to protect your kids, because that's how they lure our kids into it. Go ahead. So I think this was probably the first thing for me that was like, it doesn't happen in my community. Have you guys ever been to Corning? Any of you to the museum or downtown? It's a really pretty little town. And when I met with Elizabeth, I said, you know, I can understand how this might happen in places like New York City, Boston, maybe Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, but not Corning. Corning's this cute little town. We have tourist attractions left and right. It's just a great place to raise a family, to grow up. And she looked at me and said, it happens in every small town, in every large city across the country. It just looks different depending on where you live. That's when I had the vision of what, or the idea of what I thought sex trafficking was, before I knew what it actually was. Let me ask you one more question. How many of you have ever seen anything on the news about heroin or meth? So we can all say that it's out there. If you have a problem with heroin or meth in your community, you have sex trafficking, period. It's there. And so most of the women that we work with, quite a few of them actually had been addicted to a substance, and that's how they got pulled into it. In fact, I was having my teeth cleaned one day, and my hygienist told me that her 18-year-old niece was offered $100 by a drug dealer to try heroin for the first time. And she said yes, and that's all it took. He gave her the heroin. He lured her into this addiction that she became dependent on him. He knows that he can make a lot more money on selling her for sex than he can on selling the drug. And so it's a much more lucrative business for them. Once they figure that out, they've got control, because once you become addicted, it's really, really hard to get away from that particular drug, both meth and heroin. The very first time, have any of you ever been to Sparkle in Corning? You should go, it's awesome. It's a little Christmas festival that we do every year. And our first year as an organization, we set up a booth on Market Street in Corning for Sparkle. Nobody had ever heard of us. We're like, how do we even start talking to people? So we would just walk up and say, hey, have you ever heard of the Potter's Hands? Knowing that they didn't, because we were brand new. But we didn't know what else to say. But it gave us an opportunity to start a conversation with them. And the very first person to come to our booth that day was a teacher from one of our local schools who told us that 3 kids had been removed from their home that week because their parents had sold them in exchange for drug money, or for the drug, sold them for sex to adult men. The youngest was 3 years old, and the oldest was 16, and all of them had been sold in this way. It's heartbreaking when you see the reality of what's going on in our world, and it's people who live in our neighborhoods. It's people who live next door to us. In fact, we have a trafficking organization in our area that they call, they use what they call farms. And they will set it up so that law enforcement has a more difficult time finding where they're at. They move from one location to the next. A lot of times we think about a brothel where it's a location that you just go to and you know that you can go there and you can get what you want. Well, now with the internet, it doesn't have to be that way. And they're smart. They're smart criminals. So what they do is they move from one house one weekend to another house another weekend to another house. And one of the girls that we've been working with has been kind of closely connected, trying to help figure out where they're going and what they're doing, because she knows that it's still there, and she really has a passion to help other girls get out of it. And so, she's kind of in a bad place right now, but we had been trying to connect her and keep her safe because we're worried about her safety as she's trying to figure these things out. But what they do is they connect all the women and they tell them where to be, or that they'll pick them up and they'll take them there, what to wear, what to expect, how much people are going to pay. They don't keep the money. The money goes to the individual. They get enough money to pay their rent, to make sure that they have their bills covered, and everything else goes away. So it really is truly a form of slavery in our country. Do you know that we have more slavery in our country today than we ever have in the history of our country? And it's this kind of slavery. Other incidences, if you look at the screen, one of the first girls that I met, her name was Amber, and she grew up in a home with a single mom. Her mom was a heroin addict, and her mom started bringing men in to the house to give her drugs. And while they're in the house, they're also seeing Amber as this young teenage girl, and they start taking advantage of Amber. So she runs away from home, ends up on the streets herself, and becomes addicted to the drug. And she told me when I met with her, she goes, I remember one day just walking around like a zombie with plastic bags on my feet to keep my feet dry. And I was just like, what am I doing? But she ends up going back into it because she doesn't have an escape. She also told me, how many law enforcement in here? Anybody? No? She also told me that every time she got arrested, because she's the one that gets arrested, every time she got arrested, she would ask law enforcement for help, and because she was a heroin addict, they would just push her aside. Like, she's just an addict. She doesn't matter. That stuff breaks my heart, and I hope it breaks yours. In 2014, the FBI did a sweep across the country where they rescued 168 minor kids from sex trafficking in our bigger cities, because that's usually where the money goes. They go to the bigger cities, they do these sting operations, and they rescued 168 kids. Of those kids, 112 of them had never been reported missing by anybody. They're what our society would call throwaway kids. They're kids who grow up in foster care, run away, nobody pays attention to them anymore. Throwaway kids in the United States of America, guys, come on, right? Not okay. It's just sickening that this is happening here. Lost my train of thought. You can go to the next slide. It'll come back. So what are we doing? Back in 2013, after I met with Elizabeth and really felt like, yes, this is something God wants me to do, we incorporated. We wrote our 501c3 application, which was a long process, got it approved 6 months later, which was a miracle, and began raising money in October of 2014. Somewhere, I think it was about June 2014, I had this list on my computer I called the action list. And I would just write down ideas or names of people that I needed to pray about. God, why'd you put that person's name in my head? Do I need to go talk to them, meet with them, whatever it was? And I had this man's name pop into my head. I knew he was a Christian. I knew he was a builder. And I had no intention of building a home. Like, it was the last thing on my list. As I said, I was still teaching 8th grade English, and I was doing my thing, and like building a house on top of trying to open a home was just too much. I thought we'd find a house. I love looking at houses on Zillow. Anyone else there with me? And so I would do that. I would make my husband drive all over creation looking for this perfect house. I think somebody's doing the same thing here. No. Oh, okay. And so when I put his name down, I had no clue why I would put a builder's name on my list. 6 months after I put his name down, someone called us and said, we have 5 acres of land we'd like to donate. I'm like, great, we'll take the girls camping. You know, what else are we going to do with this wooded property? And so eventually, 6 months after that, which was a year after I put this man's name on my list, my friend said, you have to come see this property. So I said, Tom, come on, let's go. We got in the car, we drove up there. As soon as we got out of the car, it was like, boom. Wow, God's presence. The peace that we felt. It was incredible. I can't even explain it, but it was instant that we knew we were standing on holy ground, and that's where we were to build the house. So I knew I had to call that guy that I'd never met and say, hey. So I emailed him that night, tried to call him, left him a message, didn't tell him what I was doing, just that I wanted to talk to him about a project. He was a builder. He probably figured she wants to build a house. So he said, can you call me tomorrow after 1? At 1 o'clock, I went up to my pool, and I sat there for 2 hours and prayed because I was such a chicken. I was so afraid to call this man and just say, hey, this is what God's telling me. But anyway, at 3 o'clock, I finally called, and we started talking. And I said, hi, my name's Deb Keener. I really think I'm supposed to open up this home. Somebody's donated land. And he said, how did you get my name? And I said, I really believe God gave me your name. I've had your name on my list for a year, but yesterday I saw the property, and I really felt compelled to call you. And he said to me, have you ever seen the movie Taken? Any of you ever see that movie about a traffic situation? And I said, yes, I've seen the movie. And he said, well, I recently saw that movie, but I told my wife yesterday that if God ever asked me to be involved in the fight against trafficking, I couldn't say no. And I went, okay. I literally started crying. He was actually crying on the other end of the phone. And this man has been an incredible blessing to our organization. My husband and I met with him, and he said that he was going to build this house for us, and he designed the home and not charge us anything for his time. We now have a 9,000 square foot home with 10 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms that will be opening on January 2nd, 2018 for our staff, and on the 15th of January for our first guests to come in and stay with us for at least a year to get the healing that they need. We'll have up to 12 women at a time in our care. The first 4 months, our focus is really on just the trauma that they've endured, helping them through that trauma, because it is horrific stuff that they go through. The second 4 months will be just kind of continuing the counseling, but helping them determine, what do I want to do with my life when I'm done here? Getting them set on that path. And then the last 4 months, our goal is to help them kind of get into that. So transition into if they want to go to school, if they want a job, help them find a job, give them interview skills, all of that stuff, so that we can help them reestablish in life. But once they graduate, that's probably the most important step, because we can't just send them off into this scary world. We want to continue to encourage them and support them and mentor them so that they feel like they have a forever family that cares about them. So we go around and we talk about what we're doing all over the place. I've been in schools, I've been in Rotary clubs, sunshine Rotary clubs that meet at 6 in the morning, and I can barely talk. I'm like, what are you doing at 6 o'clock in the morning asking me to speak in front of you? Everywhere you can imagine, we just want to go and share the message, because we want to help as many women as we can. And you know, one of the things Elizabeth said to me that very first day that I met with her is, now you know. You can no longer go like this, go back into your community and pretend you haven't heard. And I'm going to say the same thing to you. Now you know. You have a responsibility to educate other people, to talk about this issue and bring light to it. You know, our goal is to bring hope and healing into the lives of the women that we work with, because we know that Jesus is the only one that can truly heal. We've seen it happen with some of the women that we're working with. I can think of one woman in particular. Her name's Jessica. She just oozes happiness and joy. And this woman was sold at age 12 by her mother to a 35-year-old man. And this woman has come so far because of the healing work that Jesus has done in her life. You wouldn't know that she has been through all that she's been through. Every time we're with her, we're just amazed, because she's just a light, somebody who just exudes joy. Can you go ahead to the next slide? Obviously, we sang about this earlier today. You know, when we are in a relationship with Christ, we do have a new identity. And that's our goal for these women, that they feel like they have an identity for the first time in their lives. They obviously have to have a willingness to work on their recovery. You can go ahead to the next one. There's lots of ways you can get involved. This is my favorite part. We have a group of women we call Rahab's Rebels. I was praying one morning and saying, God, I teach English. How do I raise this kind of money to build a home? And he basically dropped the name Rahab's Rebels into my head with the idea to ask some friends if they'd be willing to help us fundraise. We have over 100 rebels on our email list right now who are constantly raising money. Yesterday, Anne, who organized the dinner, would be considered a rebel. She probably doesn't even know that we're giving her that title, but she is. We have 2 women that make wool mittens out of old wool sweaters, and they sell them for $35 a pair. The last I knew, it was over 300. It's probably 350 pairs of mittens that they've sold. We have individuals who make quilts for us. We have an Etsy site. It just goes on and on. I have a friend who's a personal trainer who does boot camps the day after Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's when we've all eaten too much, and they donate the money to the Potter's Hand. So any crazy fundraising idea that anybody has, it works, and it's all coming to support our cause. Have any of you seen the movie Priceless? It's an awesome movie. One of the girls that we work with just said it's kind of the Cinderella story, you know, and that's kind of what we want to give them. We want to give them a life that feels like, yes, I am somebody and I can be somebody. Go ahead. We also have a lot of different ways you can get involved. One of the things that we're trying to build right now is our monthly sponsorship. We figure that it costs about $70 a day to have one girl in our care. Seems like a lot of money. But when you think about New York State's prison system, it's $164 a day for one person in our prison system, and there's no restoration happening. I'm sorry. We see it over and over again. They come out, they go back in. Not always, because, especially if somebody can meet Jesus while they're in jail or in prison. But a lot of the times there's no restoration happening. The home that we've partnered with down in Lexington, Kentucky, and I say partner just because they've been a support to us, their success rate is somewhere between like 87 and 93%. When you look at just a drug rehab place, it's like, I think it's like 19 to 20% or 23%, something like that. Because you can talk about a higher power, but if you don't have Jesus, then you cannot, it makes all the difference. What can I say? Go ahead. Lots of prayer requests. Actually, there's a card in the seat back in front of you, the white card and the information card. On that white card, if you are interested in being a volunteer in any way, if you think I can volunteer 2 days a month, or I'd love to come down and do some cleaning before you open the house, whatever it is, you can fill that card out and we'll have somebody get in touch with you. It's also our donor card, so if you want to make a monthly pledge, you can do that through our website. You can set it up and it goes automatically, which is awesome for us because that's really what we need to be sustainable long term. And if you would like to be on our prayer newsletter, we send out a newsletter every month with prayer updates. Prayer is huge. We have about 300 people on our newsletter, and I believe that's why we have been so successful in such a short time, because we have God's people praying and supporting us. We have hundreds of volunteers, but there's always room for one more. Go ahead to the next one. I want to show you a couple pictures. If you can just, this is the team actually from Gary, New York, came and put in our foundation last year. You can just flip through these kind of quickly, just to give people. John Neal was the guy that headed it up. This is kind of in the process. Go ahead. You're doing a great job. The windows are incredible in this place. This is one you can pause on for a second. When we were building, every time we had volunteers come in, we would write scripture on the walls, on the floor, on the studs of this house, or prayers or songs. And it just feels like you are in God's house when you're in this place, because the bones of this place are covered in God's word. It's really beautiful. Taking shape. That's the last and most recent picture of the outside. Right now we're doing the very finishing stages with sanding the floors for, I don't know how many times they do that, but it's like 4 times to put the finishing coats on, and just doing all the finishing trim and touches of the house. So it's going to be done by Thanksgiving, with us giving us time to get the house furnished and set up and ready to roll. So I've said a lot. I would love to know if any of you have any questions that you're just sitting there and you want to know. I'd love to ask this question right now. We'll just take a couple minutes for that. Anybody? Nope. Here's the thing. Brianne and I will both be up here after the service. If you'd like to come and talk to us, sometimes you may be sitting here thinking, I know somebody that I'm worried about, or if you just want more information and you'd like to get involved, we'll be up here to answer any of your questions after service. Thank you so much for letting us come and be here today. You guys are awesome. God bless. Oops.
Where they will need people who are good at things like building and plumbing and things like that. Hi, Brendan. What's up, Mike? What's up, all of you? So, that'd be an incredible way. So maybe you're thinking, I don't have Father, we love you. I thank you for your faithfulness. I thank you for stories that we get to hear of you doing incredible work when you call someone to something specific. When you call us, you don't leave us to our own, but you open doors, you make it happen. So we praise you for your faithfulness. So Lord, as the house opens in just a few short months, I pray that you are blessing the volunteers, that you're blessing the staff, and that you are blessing the women who are going to be impacted by this ministry, that you are changing lives. Not because of a building necessarily, but because of the power of Jesus Christ. Because of your transforming power and how you use us to be your hands and feet in the world. So we thank you and we praise you and we worship you. Father, it is an honor to gather and to worship you as your people. And we worship you through song, we also worship you through giving. So I pray that you are blessing us with generous hearts as we give back to you a small portion of what you have blessed.